phone rang at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, the exact moment I was polishing Rebecca's headstone photograph for the memorial service display. Emily's name flashed on the screen like a neon accusation. "Dad, we need to talk." Her voice carried that particular edge I'd learned to recognize over 28 years of fatherhood. The tone that preceded demands disguised as requests. I set down the cloth, Rebecca's smile still gleaming beneath the glass. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "Tyler and I moved the wedding date up. It's going to be May 15th now." The words hit me like ice water. May 15th. The date I'd carved into my calendar 2 years ago. The day I'd promised Rebecca I would gather everyone who loved her and tell the stories that made her immortal. The day I'd sworn with her hand growing cold in mine that I would honor her memory no matter what the world demanded of me. "Emily, that's the day of your mother's memorial service." "I know." 2 words flat and final as a gravestone inscription. "That's why we're calling. You need to choose Dad. Mom's memorial or my wedding. You can't have both." The silence stretched between us like a bridge burning. In the background, I could hear Tyler's voice, a low murmur of encouragement, coaching her through this conversation, like he'd coached her through everything else in their relationship. The man who'd convinced my daughter that a 5-year memorial service was morbid and unhealthy, that her dead mother was somehow competing with her living happiness. "Sarah, honey, we scheduled this service 2 years ago. I sent invitations to every person who loved your mother. Pastor Williams cleared his calendar. The church hall is booked. Your aunts are flying in from Oregon. And I'm getting married, Dad. The church we wanted had a cancellation, and we have to take it or wait another year. This is my one shot at the perfect wedding." Perfect. The word sat in my throat like a stone. Martha used to say that perfect was the enemy of good, that chasing perfection was like trying to catch your own shadow. But our daughter had been chasing shadows for years now, ever since she met Brad, with his investment banker's salary and his certainty that everything in life could be optimized, scheduled, and controlled. "Your mother died 5 years ago," I said quietly, each word carefully chosen. "This memorial isn't just for her. It's for everyone who loved her and never got to say goodbye properly. Mrs. Henderson still cries every time she sees Martha's empty pew at church. Your cousin Jenny has been writing a speech about how your mother helped her through her divorce. Dad?" Emily's voice sharpened, and I could picture her face the way her jaw set when she'd made up her mind about something, a gesture she'd inherited from Rebecca, but wielded like a weapon. "Mom's been dead for 5 years. It's time to move on. She would want you at my wedding, not sitting in some church hall talking about the past." "How do you know what she'd want?" The question escaped before I could stop it raw and immediate. "Did she leave you instructions about when I should stop honoring her memory? Because she left me some very specific words about what mattered to her." Tyler's voice grew louder in the background, urgent and insistent. Emily covered the phone, but I could still hear fragments. "Told you he'd be difficult. Guilt trip. Our day." When she came back on the line, her voice had hardened into something I barely recognized. "Dad, listen to me carefully. I'm only getting married once. This is the most important day of my life. If you choose a memorial service for someone who's already dead, over celebrating your living daughter's happiness, then you're telling me exactly where I rank in your priorities." The ultimatum hung between us like a noose. Choose the dead or choose the living. Choose your promises or choose your daughter. Choose the woman who gave you the best 30 years of your life or the girl who'd grown into someone you barely recognized. I looked at Rebecca's photograph again, at the laugh lines around her eyes that mapped out decades of shared joy. She'd been the compass that kept our family pointing toward true north. The steady hand that guided us through Emily's teenage rebellions, her college anxieties, her quarter-life crisis when she couldn't decide between graduate school and traveling Europe. Rebecca had always known exactly what to say, exactly how to love our daughter without spoiling her, how to set boundaries without building walls. But Rebecca wasn't here anymore. And the daughter we'd raised together, the girl who used to spend hours helping her mother plant memorial roses in the backyard, who once said she wanted a marriage just like Mom and Dad's, was giving me an ultimatum that would have broken Rebecca's heart. Emily. I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I made a promise to your mother. The kind of promise you make only once in a lifetime, usually when someone you love is dying in your arms. And I'm making a promise to Tyler, in front of God and everyone we love. What's more important, Dad? A promise to the dead or a commitment to the living? The question was designed to corner me, to make me look selfish and obsessive and stuck in the past. But promises I'd learned weren't about convenience or timing, or even about the people who heard them. Promises were about the person you became when you kept them, and the person you became when you didn't. I'll call you back, I said. Dad, wait. I hung up and sat in the sudden quiet of my kitchen, Rebecca's photograph still gleaming under the lamplight. Outside, the memorial roses she'd planted were beginning to bud, getting ready for their annual resurrection. In 2 days, I would have to decide whether to honor the woman who'd taught me how to love or attend the wedding of a daughter who'd forgotten everything that woman had taught her. The phone rang again. Emily's name flashed insistently, demanding an immediate answer to an impossible question. I let it ring. Some decisions I was learning required more than a moment's thought. They required the kind of careful consideration you gave to promises that mattered, to commitments that defined not just what you did, but who you were when everything else fell away. The roses outside swayed in the evening breeze, keeping their own counsel, preparing for their own resurrection. And somewhere in the space, between the ringing phone and Rebecca's silent smile, I began to understand what my answer would have to be. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my recliner, the one Rebecca had insisted we buy for my 50th birthday, because she said I needed a place to read without hurting my back, and let 28 years of memories wash over me like a pss that wouldn't recede. The photo albums came down from the closet at 3 a.m., dusty guardians of a life I'd thought was safely stored away. But Emily's ultimatum had cracked something open, and now the past spilled across my coffee table in glossy fragments. Rebecca pregnant with Emily, glowing like candlelight. Emily's first steps, arms outstretched toward a mother who would catch her every time she fell. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, soccer games where Rebecca cheered louder than any parent had a right to. And then the cancer years. The photographs grew sparse after the diagnosis, but the memories burned brighter. Rebecca insisting I take Emily to her senior prom dress shopping while she underwent chemo because a girl needs her father's opinion on these things. The way she'd worn a wig to Emily's graduation, sweating under the junta, but refusing to miss her daughter walking across that stage. Promise me something. She'd whispered that last night in the hospital, her voice thin as tissue paper, but her grip on my hand surprisingly strong. Promise me you'll tell Emily's children who their grandmother was. Not just the cancer part. The whole story. I'd promised, of course. What husband wouldn't? But Rebecca wasn't finished. And Tom. She'd continued, her eyes finding mine in the dim light of the cardiac monitor. 5 years from now, when the grief isn't so sharp, gather everyone who loved me. Tell the stories that make me real again. Make sure they know I was here. 5 years. She'd been specific about the timing, as if she'd calculated exactly how long it would take for the raw wound of her loss to scar over into something bearable. As if she'd known I'd need that long to find the words that would do justice to 30 years of shared mornings and whispered conversations, and the way she hummed while folding laundry. The memorial service had been her idea, not mine. Like a celebration, she'd said, but with better stories and no awkward small talk about the weather. I'd spent 2 years planning it the way she would have planned Emily's wedding if she'd lived to see it. Every detail considered, every person who'd loved Rebecca invited to share the burden and joy of remembering her. Mrs. Patterson was bringing Rebecca's famous chocolate chip cookie recipe, the one she'd guarded like a state secret until she passed it on to our neighbor the day before she died. Ashley was flying in from Denver with photo boards she'd made of their college adventures. Even Dr. Martinez, Rebecca's oncologist, had promised to come and tell the story about how she'd convinced him to wear a Superman cape during her final chemotherapy session. She said it would help other patients believe in miracles, he'd told me when I extended the invitation. I wore that cape for 6 months after she died. Never told anyone why. These were the stories Emily wanted me to abandon for a party. These were the people she expected me to disappoint for the sake of her perfect day. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept turning pages searching for the moment when my daughter had transformed from the girl who'd held my hand at her mother's funeral into the woman who could demand I choose between honoring Rebecca's memory and celebrating her happiness. The transformation hadn't been sudden. I could see it now in retrospect, subtle shifts in the photograph chronology. Emily at 22, still soft-eyed and generous, volunteering at the animal shelter Rebecca had supported. Emily at 24, sharper, somehow working her first corporate job and complaining about her co-workers' lack of ambition. Emily at 26, introducing us to Tyler with a pride that bordered on possession, as if she'd landed something rare and valuable that needed to be displayed. Tyler. The man who'd systematically isolated Emily from everything that connected her to her mother. Who'd convinced her that grief had an expiration date and that honoring the dead was somehow disloyal to the living. Who'd probably orchestrated this ultimatum, knowing exactly which day would force me to choose between my wife and my daughter. The phone rang at dawn, jerking me out of my vigil. Emily's name flashed again, insistent and demanding. "Dad, we need to talk." The same words as yesterday, but her voice carried a different kind of desperation now. "I'm listening." "Tyler thinks. We think you're having some kind of breakdown. This obsession with Mom's memorial service isn't healthy. It's been 5 years, Dad. At some point, you have to let go. Let go. As if love was a rope you could release. When it became inconvenient, as if 30 years of marriage could be filed away like old tax returns. Emily, do you remember what you said at your mother's funeral? A pause. I said a lot of things. I was upset. You said, and I quote, "I want to be exactly like her when I grow up. I want to love someone the way she loved you." Dad, you also said you'd never let anyone make you forget who she was. That her memory would guide every important decision you made. The silence stretched longer this time. When Emily spoke again, her voice had hardened into the tone I'd heard more and more often since Tyler entered her life. That was grief talking. I was 23 and emotional. People say things at funerals they don't really mean. Do they? I asked quietly. Or do they say things at funerals they mean more than anything they've ever said before? Dad, listen to me. I'm getting married in 2 days. This is the most important weekend of my life. Tyler's family is flying in from Boston. My dress cost $3,000. The photographer alone cost more than most people make in a month. We've invested everything in this day. Invested. The word sat between us like a stockbroker's promise, cold and calculating. When had my daughter started talking about her wedding like a business transaction? And what did I invest, Emily, in you, in us, in the family your mother and I built? That's different. That's what parents do. Is it because your mother and I chose to have you, chose to sacrifice for you, chose to put your happiness ahead of our own convenience for 28 years? We chose to love you even when you made it difficult. Especially when you made it difficult. I could hear her breathing short and frustrated the way she used to breathe when she was a child and couldn't get her way. Fine, she said finally. Let's talk about sacrifice. Let's talk about what you've invested. You want numbers, Dad? I'll give you numbers. The phone went quiet, except for the rustling of papers. When Emily spoke again, her voice carried the flat precision of a prosecutor reading charges. College tuition, including room and board, $184,000. My car, $22,000. The down payment on my first apartment, $15,000. Wedding expenses you've already committed to $47,000. Total investment in my happiness and future, $268,000. Each number hit like a physical blow, not because of the amounts, but because of how carefully she'd calculated them, how precisely she'd measured her father's love in dollars and cents. Now, she continued, let's talk about your return on that investment. I graduated summa cum laude. I landed a job at Harrison & Associates straight out of college. I'm marrying a man who makes 6 figures and will give you grandchildren you can spoil. I'm successful, stable, and happy. Everything you and Mom wanted for me. Everything we wanted for you, I said slowly, was for you to become a woman your mother would be proud of. She would be proud. She'd be thrilled that I found love, that I'm building a life, that I'm moving forward instead of staying trapped in the past. Would she? Would your mother be proud that you're asking me to break a promise I made to her while she was dying? Emily's voice cracked just slightly. She's dead, Dad. Whatever promises you think you made don't matter anymore. The only promises that matter are the ones we make to the people who are still here. Your mother is still here, I said. Every time you laugh at something ridiculous the way she used to. Every time you tilt your head when you're thinking hard about something. Every time you show kindness to a stranger who needs it. She's here in every choice you make that honors what she taught you about love and loyalty and doing the right thing even when it's difficult. And if I choose Tyler's happiness over your memorial service, that means I'm betraying her. The question hung between us, sharp and painful as a surgical knife. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know that if you force me to choose between honoring my promise to her and celebrating your marriage, one of us is going to spend the rest of our lives regretting what we chose. Dad, I need more time, Emily. This isn't a decision I can make in a phone call. We don't have more time. The wedding is in 48 hours. Then maybe, I said quietly, you should have thought of that before you moved the date. I hung up and looked out at Rebecca's roses, now fully bloomed in the morning sunlight. They'd survived winter, survived neglect, survived 5 years without her hands to tend them. But they'd kept blooming, kept reaching toward the sun, kept honoring the woman who'd planted them with such hope. Some promises I was beginning to understand weren't just about the person who heard them. They were about the person who made them and who they became when they kept faith with the dead as well as the living. 24 hours before I had to choose between my wife and my daughter Emily showed up at my door with Tyler in tow and fury in her eyes. I'd been expecting this visit since our phone conversation ended in uncomfortable silence. What I hadn't expected was the way Emily looked hollow-eyed and brittle like crystal under pressure. Marriage preparation, I realized, wasn't supposed to leave the bride looking like she'd been through a war. "We need to settle this, Dad." Emily pushed past me into the living room, Tyler following like a well-dressed shadow. "We can't have this hanging over our wedding day." Tyler offered his hand the same firm grip he'd perfected for client meetings and father-in-law management. "Tom, good to see you." Emily's been stressed about this whole situation. "I thought maybe we could work something out man to man." I looked at him. Really looked for the first time since Emily had brought him home 3 years ago. Tyler was handsome in the way that expensive haircuts and well-tailored suits could make any man handsome. But his eyes were calculating, measuring every word and gesture for its potential return on investment. He'd turned my daughter into a project, and now I was the obstacle threatening his timeline. "There's nothing to work out," I said quietly. "Emily asked me to choose. I'm still deciding." "Dad." Emily's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Look at me. Really look at me. Do I look like a happy bride-to-be?" She didn't. She looked like a woman who'd been fighting a battle she couldn't win, caught between the man she'd chosen and the father who'd raised her. But marriages I'd learned over 30 years with Rebecca weren't built on capitulation. They were built on the ability to navigate disagreement without losing sight of what mattered most. "You look like someone who's discovered that getting everything you want doesn't always make you happy," I said. Tyler's jaw tightened. "With respect, Tom, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. It's one day. One memorial service that you could reschedule for any other weekend. Emily only gets married once." "And I only buried my wife once," I replied. "But apparently that's less important than your wedding photos." "That's not fair." Emily sank onto the couch. Rebecca's couch where she'd spent countless evenings reading stories to Emily when she was small. "You're making me sound selfish and horrible." "I'm not making you sound like anything. I'm listening to the words you're choosing to say." Tyler moved closer to Emily, a protective gesture that might have seemed romantic if I hadn't recognized it as territorial. "Look, we get that the memorial service is important to you. But Emily's your daughter. Your living daughter who needs you at the most important moment of her life. And what about the most important moments of my life?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended. "When your mother was dying, Emily, who held your hand through every chemo session, who drove you to college orientation because she was too sick to make the trip herself, but insisted you needed family support." "You did," Emily whispered. "When you called home crying because your first job was too demanding and you wanted to quit, who spent 3 hours on the phone convincing you that you were stronger than you knew." "Mom did. When you got promoted and wanted to celebrate, who did you call first?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I called Mom's voicemail just to hear her voice tell me how proud she was." Tyler's expression shifted, recognizing dangerous territory. "Emily, we've talked about this. Living in the past isn't healthy. Your mom would want you to be happy." "Would she?" I asked. "Because the woman I was married to for 30 years believed that happiness built on someone else's sacrifice wasn't happiness at all. It was selfishness, dressed up in pretty clothes." "Are you calling me selfish?" Emily's voice rose, years of suppressed guilt and grief finally finding an outlet. "I'm saying You're asking me to break the most sacred promise I've ever made, so you can have a perfect wedding day. What would you call that? Tyler stood abruptly, his careful composure cracking. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. You're emotionally manipulating her, using her grief as a weapon. It's toxic, Tom. And frankly, if you can't support your daughter's happiness, maybe she's better off without you. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, acrid and destructive and impossible to take back. Emily gasped, staring at Tyler as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. Tyler, don't... No, Emily. Someone needs to say it. Your father is using your dead mother to control you, to make you feel guilty for moving on with your life. That's not love. That's manipulation. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest, like ice forming over a lake in winter. Get out of my house. Tom, I think we're all just... Get out. I stood 30 years of contained grief and 5 years of watching my daughter transform into a stranger, finally finding their voice. Get out of my house, out of my driveway, and out of my life. Tyler's face flushed red. You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? Emily was crying now, silent tears that spoke of a deeper pain than wedding stress. Dad, please. Tyler didn't mean... Yes, he did. He meant every word. And you know what, Emily? He's right about one thing. If you can't support my commitment to honoring your mother's memory, then maybe you are better off without me. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily looked back and forth between us, a daughter forced to choose between the man who'd raised her and the man she'd chosen to marry. I could see the moment she made her decision, the way her shoulders straightened and her chin lifted, Rebecca's gesture even as she prepared to break Rebecca's heart. Dad, I love you. But Tyler is going to be my husband. If you can't respect that, if you can't put my happiness first, just this once, then maybe we don't have anything else to say to each other. Sure. She stood and took Tyler's arm, presenting a united front that excluded me as effectively as a locked door. The wedding is tomorrow at 3 o'clock at St. Mark's. If you're not there, I'll understand that you've made your choice. They left without another word, Emily's heels clicking against the hardwood floor Rebecca had insisted we refinish because she wanted everything in our home to be beautiful and lasting. The sound faded into silence, leaving me alone with the photographs and the roses and the weight of a decision that would define the rest of my life. I walked to the window and watched them drive away, Tyler's BMW disappearing around the corner like a sleek black period at the end of a sentence I'd never wanted to write. Emily didn't look back. In the kitchen, Rebecca's photograph still smiled from the counter, patient and understanding as she'd always been in life. I picked it up, tracing the glass with my finger, and made the choice that had been building in my heart since Emily first demanded I choose between honoring my wife and celebrating my daughter. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I whispered to the photograph. But some promises are more important than some relationships. And you taught me that the people worth keeping are the ones who understand what promises mean. Tomorrow I would stand in Riverside Chapel and tell the story of a woman who'd loved her daughter enough to want her to be happy, but who'd also believed that happiness built on broken promises wasn't happiness at all. Tomorrow I would keep my word to the woman who taught me what love looked like when it was tested by time and loss and the choice between what was easy and what was right. And if that meant losing my daughter to a man who saw love as a transaction and grief as a weakness, then that was a price I would pay. Because some promises I'd finally learned were worth more than peace. They were worth everything. May 15th dawned clear and merciless. The kind of spring day that made promises feel possible and breaking them feel like sacrilege. I woke at 5 a.m. in my dress shirt and tie, having fallen asleep in the recliner, while watching the clock tick toward the moment that would define the rest of my life. 3 o'clock. That was when Emily would walk down the aisle at St. Mark's expecting me to be there to give her away. 2 o'clock. That was when I would stand at the podium in Riverside Chapel and tell 200 people who Rebecca had been when she was alive and breathing and making the world better, just by being in it. The arithmetic of love, it turned out, was brutal in its simplicity. By 7, I was showering and rehearsing the speech I'd written and rewritten a dozen times. By 8, I was standing in front of Rebecca's portrait, straightening my tie and asking her forgiveness for what I was about to put our daughter through. By 9, I was loading Rebecca's memorial displays into my car, each photograph and memory board a small act of rebellion against the daughter who'd asked me to pretend her mother had never existed. The first call came at 9:47 a.m. "Tom, this is Margaret Chen, Emily's maid of honor, a woman I'd known since she and Emily were roommates at college. I'm sorry to bother you, but Emily she's not doing well. She keeps asking if you've called if you've changed your mind. I was wondering." "I haven't changed my mind, Margaret." A pause. "She's getting married in 5 hours, Tom. Whatever disagreement you two are having, surely it can wait until after." "The disagreement," I said quietly, "is that my daughter asked me to choose between honoring my dead wife and celebrating her living happiness. What would you choose, Margaret?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know. But I know Emily needs her father today. Emily has had her father for 28 years. Today, Rebecca gets hers." I hung up and continued loading the car. The memorial roses clipped from Rebecca's garden at dawn went in last, wrapped in wet paper towels and nestled in the same basket she'd used for her flower arrangements when she was alive. If I was going to tell her story, I was going to do it right. The second call came at 11:15, just as I arrived at Riverside Chapel. "Dad." Emily's voice was thick with tears and what sounded like desperation. "Please, I'm begging you. Tyler's family is here. Everyone is asking where you are, and I don't know what to tell them." I sat in my car in the chapel parking lot, watching early guests arrive for Rebecca's memorial. Mrs. Patterson was climbing the front steps, carrying the cookie recipe Rebecca had entrusted to her. Ashley was directing the photographer I'd hired to document the stories people would share. Dr. Martinez was setting up a display about Rebecca's impact on other cancer patients, including the Superman cape she'd made him wear. "Tell them the truth," I said. "Tell them your father is keeping a promise he made to your dying mother." "Dad, I'm falling apart. The photographer wants family shots, the coordinator needs to know about the processional, and Tyler keeps asking where you are. I can't do this without you." For a moment, just a moment, I wavered. The sound of my daughter's voice breaking the image of her standing alone in a wedding dress without anyone to walk her down the aisle, the knowledge that this decision would scar our relationship forever. But then I looked through the chapel windows and saw Pastor Johnson arranging Rebecca's photographs on the altar. The same hands that had blessed our marriage 31 years ago, now preparing to celebrate the woman who'd made that marriage sacred. "Emily, sweetheart, I love you. But I made a promise to your mother that I intend to keep. If you can't understand that, if Tyler can't understand that, then maybe this is exactly the conversation we needed to have before you got married. You're choosing her over me. My dead mother over your living daughter." The accusation hit like a physical blow. But I'd had 5 years to think about love and loyalty and what it meant to honor someone who couldn't advocate for themselves anymore. "No, Emily. I'm choosing the kind of man your mother married over the kind of man you're marrying. I'm choosing promises that matter over parties that don't." I'm choosing to be the father she wanted me to be instead of the father you're demanding I become." The line went quiet except for Emily's ragged breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was hollow with finality. "Then I guess we both know where we stand." She hung up. I sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes watching Rebecca's friends and family gather to remember her, and felt the strangest sensation of peace settle over me like morning sunlight through church windows. At 1:30, I walked into Riverside Chapel and took my place at the podium. 200 faces looked back at me. People who'd loved Rebecca, been helped by her, been made better by knowing her. People who understood that some promises transcended convenience, that some commitments were more important than comfort. "We're here today," I began, "to remember a woman who taught us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day, especially when that choice is difficult." The service was everything Rebecca would have wanted. Mrs. Patterson told the story about the time Rebecca drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to deliver homemade soup to a friend with pneumonia. Ashley shared photos from their college road trip when Rebecca had insisted they stop at every historical marker, because history matters even when it's inconvenient. Dr. Martinez wore the Superman cape and talked about how Rebecca had convinced 12 other patients to believe in miracles during their darkest hours. At 3:15 minutes after Emily should have walked down the aisle, my phone began buzzing with texts. Margaret Tyler's mother, even people I barely knew, all asking where I was, what had happened, why the wedding was falling apart. I turned off my phone and continued listening to the stories that made Rebecca immortal. The final speaker was Sarah Williams, a young mother whose daughter had been in Emily's kindergarten class. Rebecca had tutored the little girl through a learning disability, spending hours after school helping her read when her own teachers had given up. "Rebecca told me something once that I've never forgotten," Sarah said, looking directly at me. "She said that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when it was easy, but what they did when it cost them everything. Today, Tom is showing us what that looks like." The service ended at 5 p.m. with the planting of a memorial rose bush in the chapel garden. The same variety Rebecca had grown at home transplanted here, so everyone who'd loved her would have a place to remember her by. As I patted soil around the roots, I felt Rebecca's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside me, approving of the choice I'd made. My phone had 47 missed calls and 23 text messages. I deleted them all without reading them. Some decisions I'd learned weren't meant to be explained or justified or defended. They were meant to be lived with, day after day, year after year, until the weight of keeping them became lighter than the weight of breaking them would have been. I drove home as the sun set Rebecca's memorial. Roses blooming in my back seat like promises kept, like love that refused to die. Like the kind of commitment that lasted longer than wedding days and honeymoon phases, and the particular kind of happiness that demanded other people sacrifice their integrity to sustain it. Tomorrow, I would begin learning to live without my daughter. But tonight, I would sleep knowing I'd kept faith with my wife. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like enough. I spent the night after Rebecca's memorial service in the kind of sleep that comes after moral certainty, deep and dreamless and undisturbed by second-guessing. When I woke at dawn, the silence in my house felt different. Not empty, but complete, like a sentence that had finally found its period. The doorbell rang at 8:17 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw Emily standing on my porch, still in yesterday's clothes, but no longer in her wedding dress. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup long since washed away by tears, and she was clutching something small and silver in her hands. I opened the door. "Dad," her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." She looked like a woman who'd spent the night making decisions that would reshape the rest of her life. I stepped aside and let her in, noting the way she moved, careful and deliberate, as if she were walking through a house of cards that might collapse at any sudden movement. "Emily, sweetheart, No." She held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "Let me go first. I need to say this before I lose my courage." She sat on Rebecca's couch in the exact spot where she used to curl up as a child when she needed to confess some small transgression. The object in her hands was a small digital camera, the same one Rebecca had used to record Emily's school plays and birthday parties, now looking ancient in the age of smartphones. "The wedding didn't happen," she said quietly. "I called it off an hour before the ceremony." I sat across from her, my heart doing something complicated between relief and sorrow. "Emily, I'm sorry if..." Are you sorry?" Her eyes met mine and I saw something there I hadn't seen in years. The raw honesty that comes after pretense has been stripped away like old wallpaper. "Because I'm not. Not about calling off the wedding. I'm sorry about a lot of things, but marrying Tyler isn't one of them." She turned the camera over in her hands, studying it like an archaeologist examining a relic from a lost civilization. "After you hung up on me yesterday morning, I spent 2 hours crying in my wedding dress, while Tyler paced around the bridal suite talking about damage control and managing the optics." That's what he called it, Dad. Managing the optics of his bride's father abandoning her wedding. I said nothing, letting her work through whatever revelation she was building toward. Then Margaret, you remember Margaret, my maid of honor? She asked me something that changed everything. She said, "When you picture being married for 30 years, can you honestly see Tyler making the same choice your father made today?" Emily's voice cracked like ice breaking on a frozen pond. And I realized I couldn't. I couldn't imagine Tyler sacrificing his convenience for my principles, let alone honoring my memory after I was gone. Tyler sees relationships as investments with expected returns. He doesn't understand promises that cost more than they benefit. She looked around the room, taking in the memorial photos. I hadn't yet put away the roses from Rebecca's garden, still fragrant in their crystal vases. So I told him the wedding was off. He asked me if I'd lost my mind, if I was having some kind of breakdown over an old man's stubbornness. When I said I was choosing my family over his timeline, he called you pathetic. He said any man still obsessing over his dead wife after 5 years was emotionally stunted. The words hit me like a fist to the solar plexus. He said that about your mother. Worse. He said I was better off cutting ties with you completely, that your unhealthy attachment to Mom's memory was toxic to our future. Emily's hands were shaking now. That's when I knew Dad. Tyler wasn't angry about the wedding being disrupted. He was angry about losing control, about discovering there were people in my life who couldn't be bought, convinced, or manipulated into submission. She looked at me directly, and I saw Rebecca in her eyes, the same moral clarity, the same quiet strength that had anchored our family for 30 years. I threw him out. In front of his parents, his groomsmen, everyone. And you know what his parting shot was. He said I'd regret choosing a dead woman over a living man. Emily, I'm not finished. She held up the camera. After I sent everyone home and changed out of that dress, I went to the attic. I started going through Mom's things, really going through them, not just preserving them like museum pieces. And I found this. She pressed a button on the camera's side, and suddenly the living room filled with Rebecca's voice, as clear and present as morning coffee and Sunday newspapers. If you're watching this, my darling family, it means something has torn you apart, something about love and loyalty, about keeping faith with the dead while celebrating the living. the world stopped. Time folded in on itself like origami made of memory and grief. There she was, my Rebecca alive on that small screen. Her hair still thick and auburn, her eyes still bright with the intelligence that had captivated me 3 decades ago. She was wearing the blue sweater I'd bought her for Christmas, the one she'd never had the chance to wear, because the cancer had taken her before the holidays came. Emily, my precious girl. Rebecca's voice filled the room like sunlight through stained glass. If you're watching this, it probably means you've had to make some impossible choice between honoring me and building your own life. And Tom, my stubborn, faithful man, you're probably sitting there feeling like you have to choose between your promise to me and your love for our daughter. Emily's breath came in short gasps beside me, and I realized we were both crying. Not the polite tears of grief, but the raw, ugly sobs of people whose hearts were being broken and healed simultaneously. I need you both to know something that might surprise you. Rebecca continued, leaning forward with that conspiratorial look she'd worn when sharing secrets with Emily as a child. I didn't ask your father to remember me because I'm afraid of being forgotten. I asked him because I knew that someday, maybe at a wedding, maybe at a graduation, maybe just on some ordinary Tuesday, you'd need to remember what real love looks like when it's tested by impossible choices. She paused, and I could see her gathering strength the same way she'd done during those last weeks, when every word was a victory against the disease trying to steal her voice. Love isn't a competition between the living and the dead, sweetheart. It's a relay race where each generation passes the baton of commitment, sacrifice, and fierce loyalty to the next. If your father chose to honor his promise to me, it's not because he loves you less, it's because he's showing you what it means to love someone more than your own comfort, more than convenience, more than the fear of being misunderstood. Rebecca smiled, then the same radiant smile that had convinced me to propose after 6 months, because I couldn't imagine waking up without it. Emily, when you find someone to marry, and I hope you do, my darling, I hope you find love that makes you brave. Make sure it's someone who understands that promises aren't contracts to be negotiated when they become inconvenient. They're sacred commitments that define who we become when everything else falls away. She looked directly into the camera, as if she could see through time to this exact moment. And Tom, my love, if keeping your promise to me costs you your relationship with our daughter, then I release you from that promise right now. Because the greatest honor you could give my memory would be walking Emily down the aisle to marry someone worthy of the woman we raised together. The video flickered and went dark, leaving Emily and me sitting in silence, punctuated only by our tears and the sound of Rebecca's roses rustling in the breeze from the kitchen window. She recorded this 2 weeks before she died, Emily said finally. The timestamp shows she made it right after her last doctor's appointment, when she knew the treatments weren't working anymore. I reached across the space between us and took my daughter's hand, the same hand I'd held when she took her first steps, the same hand that had reached for me during thunderstorms when she was small. She knew, I said quietly. She knew we'd both be stubborn enough to choose principle over peace, and wise enough to eventually choose each other over pride. Emily squeezed my fingers. Dad, I want to get married someday, but I want to marry someone who would make the same choice you made yesterday. Someone who understands that loving me means respecting the people who made me who I am. What about Tyler? Tyler, Emily said with Rebecca's own finality, was a lesson I needed to learn about the difference between love that demands sacrifice and love that's worth sacrificing for. We sat together until the sun climbed high, talking about Rebecca and promises and the strange mathematics of love that sometimes required loss before it revealed its true value. Emily helped me pack away most of the memorial displays. But we left Rebecca's roses in their places throughout the house, not as shrines to the past, but as reminders that some things are beautiful enough to honor forever. 3 months later, Emily started dating Michael Chen Margaret's younger brother, a pediatric nurse who spent his weekends reading to children in the cancer ward. When she brought him to Sunday dinner, I watched him listen, really listen, as she told him about her mother and the promises that had shaped our family. "I'd like to hear more about her," he said, looking at Rebecca's portrait on the mantel. "Not just the good parts, the whole story. What made her laugh? What made her cry? How she loved people even when it was hard." Emily looked at me across the dinner table, and I saw Rebecca's wisdom reflected in her eyes. "She'd like that," Emily said. "She always believed the best stories were the ones that got better with each telling." A year later, Michael asked for my blessing to marry Emily. When I said yes, he asked if we could hold the ceremony in May, not on the 15th, but close enough that Rebecca's memorial roses would be in bloom for the wedding photos. "I want her to be part of our beginning," he said simply. "Not competing with our happiness, but celebrating it. But some promises I learned aren't meant to be kept exactly as we imagined them. They're meant to evolve, to grow, to teach us that love's greatest victory isn't in perfect adherence to the letter of our commitments, but in understanding their spirit deeply enough to honor them even when they change shape. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the people we love most teach us that the highest form of loyalty isn't choosing between the past and the future. It's finding ways to honor both without sacrificing either." Rebecca would have liked that lesson. She always did love a story where everyone learned something worth remembering. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that love, loyalty, and keeping promises matter more than convenience. What would you have chosen? Let us know in the comments below.